conditions and number loopholes that undermine the confidentiality requirement of the bond. In 2000, the protection had been diminished and diluted number of ways and attend used to the ADA took effect by the EEOC. The courts have interpreted the ADA to prevent some forms of psychological attention. The ADA also permits for employees to test job applicants for the use of illegal substances or urine that's an applicant who is taking psychotropic medication to be identified as anyone employer who requires drug screenings. The protection accorded by the Prohibition Act against asking applicants about their history of mental health diagnosis and treatment circumvented by the fact that employees can be required to answer questionnaires about their health history. Finally, courts have given employers wide latitude to order employees to submit to fitness for duty examination, including mental health testing. Once psychiatric evaluations are required of an employee, the employee is largely insulated from challenges to reverse employment action. Those actions are based on psychiatric or psychological evaluation of employment. In addition, an employee who requests a leave of absence because of psychiatric disability can be forced to submit to testing to evaluate his or her fitness to return to work and may have to agree to take medication, undergo psychotherapy recommendation before being permitted to return to work. Case law reflects that this confidential protection is subject to a number of exceptions and in any event breached with some regulation and breaches in the confidential leads to surveillance and monitoring of those deemed mentally ill. It's still on in 2000. Psychotropic medications raise issues in ADA causes cases brought about people with psychiatric disability and running although people with psychiatric disabilities are encouraged to subject before state medication for the condition. A number of ADA cases arise because people are precluded from employment if they are taking psychotropic medications or subject to extreme surveillance and monitoring even if their job-related coverage. Problem. Advantage 1 is eugenics. Violation of confidentiality such as testing leads to genetic discrimination. That's only in 2000 past incidents of employment discrimination on the basis of the perceived health, disability, chronicle discrimination practice rooted in the corporate business. This very same unexpected voice with renewed vigor with respect to genetics and also may be taking restrictions to employees' features on the job to the extent that AD permits medical testing and genetic testing, putting genetic information into the hand of business opportunities for genetic discrimination are likely to arise. And empirically, collecting information about workers as a basis for genetic discrimination results in sterilization. Eugenics is a seltzer and the negative eugenic policy demanding on those with a fear of 0% of rendered incapable of reducing offspring. The eugenic movement found legislation expression in the enacted the state of sterilization, the quest for the perfect versus dismissed by the American society in the 1940s, found the new expression, the quest for the perfect order. And the decade following World War II, the policies that also discriminate workers, discriminatory treatment of workers that illustrates nature's inherent stereotype of workers. And eugenics will culminate in Nazi-style policies of extermination, breaking down the stigmatization of disabilities. Key to solve this patent. In 2000, disabilities have always been frequent targets of this fear. The progress has always been invented on the process of purification of ridding the world of contaminants and the propagation of eugenics, little meaning of well people with disabilities were the first targets of the Nazi government for racial abuse. After sacrifices of 255,000 were moral, we mislead, or social regard Nazi doctors and monster men who were well-intentioned, deep compassionate men who were convinced that both society and people with disabilities would be better. They were not related to the brothers in life. Was the decision act and not adventure or quoted, but by changing the intense societal pressure against disabled people to its logical conclusion. It was generally assumed that the stereotypes of physical and intellectual moral were closely related to changes to reflect each other. The strong body indicated a strong intellect and morality, but it is more disabled person expressed a desire done unanticipated one, probably assumed that this agreed with the satisfied judgment with distancing and the worst instead merely an enlightened and humane response to individual suffering so long as we continue to regions of disability as a personal reflection affect the body rather than social, cultural, and political relations. Suicide will continue to seem a rational, understandable, and acceptable reason. And devaluation of the life of the disabled destroys the value of all life. It's more in 1901 to give ourselves the right to judge someone else's life is not worth living based on the system you can make the German. And the same ideological framework as the German physical and right for it is important to recognize the mercy killing was a commitment for the whole society of the disabled. We make a judge by the quality of their lives and fundamentally undermine the value of our lives and our right to exist. It is not for us to judge whether another human being's life is worth living. Advantage 2 is nuclear arms are questioned against the disabled, reduces and maintains all other oppression and social hierarchies. This is vain 2000. Disabilities are functioning historically as justification were no contest for disabled, but cover for women and minority groups as well. The concept of disabilities implicated some extent of protection maintenance all social hierarchies. People are accorded differential and unequal treatment to produce a weapon in very many regions have been approached as the use for inequalities based on gender, race, or ethnicity, but ultimately these rest of the cultures they do believe have inherent and disability. And only by confronting the oppression and discrimination of the disabled can we stop the slide into nuclear business in Obama in 2002. Our struggle is not only against missiles but against the system, but powerfully defend the system based on domination and belief that some people are also more valuable than therefore have the right to control to exploit them so they can lead better lives than themselves with price of precise working against discrimination of all kinds of ones that we must try to understand how discrimination is the point to reduce nuclear weapons and eradication struggle to prevent nuclear destruction struggle is not serving the struggles against oppression and racism because of disability and disability discrimination root cause of nuclear weapons. Davis and it is a disabled people's movement and much to say about these battles as gay sexual agitating growing combination war violence and it means to resolve human causes more and more thousand innocent people since terrorism and disabled throughout the war the connection with disability involved consider the mentality that they try to compliant participant in the masturbation disability at hero treatment, the same amount of the instigated mass incarceration of the chain of segregated institution and thus plan. The Congress should amend the American with Disabilities Act to guarantee confidentiality for mental health care. Section 3 is solvency. The ADA can solve for violation of confidentiality mental health care that's before in 1997. The ADA also has the potential to be measured to deterrence to psychological tests and psychological examination may be considered a medical examination of the ADA which may not be administered to pre-officer. The guidance says that psychological examination would be considered a medical examination and the ADA is key to prevent genetic discrimination as a shelter In 1998, advanced in genetic discrimination could potentially be able to information regarding the gender makeup of employees under the statute restriction imposed by the ADA. An employee will not be able to use this information to make employment decisions without risking liability for employment discrimination. Finally, application of the ADA is critical to break down societal pressure against the disabled and foster societal change. With Miller in 2000, the ADA ensures that employees listen to public comments to look at individual ability to free from stereotypes and bad risky notice made about the person due to his or her disability. ADA offers America valuable tool to pursue to the workplace, but implement the dignity of all people, including persons with disabilities. The ADA sends us a unique opportunity for other individuals to join together, breaking down the long-standing myths about disabilities and building from inclusive communities. The ADA enjoys an important paradigm shift of how society will view people with disability. Only through implementing and embracing the ADA will true vision of equal society be realistic, systematically placing our myths and fears and stereotypes about people with disability will recognizing and understanding. And the ADA changes societal attitudes concerning the disabled and fosters integration. This is signed in 2000. The first president of civil rights is using the passage of civil rights mean how effective immediate changes in legal treatment that also change attitudes across the institutionalization, whereby for new forms of compliance or diffuse among organizations legal regionalized limits organizational governance. The second and main churches prior to the ADA's enacted and hitherto thus individual voters now have to attend their women's parties swearing that all these egregious and percentage degrees of the problem of the ADA titles and total to the constituent for their will lose some degree of otherness. The third degree of administrative and constituent with regards to able-bodied individual unique disability could also contribute to the reducing of others and struggles of resistance against the colonization of the disabled must work through the institution of colonization. There's a harsh in 2000 people with disability colonized people with the helping professionals are colonized the struggle that rise to free themselves when the colonists such a different within the institution that the owners establish the colonization of the minds of indigenous people with such a successful policy domination planning the direct economic the benefits of the colonized the kosher exploitation loss of dignity that became a fact in the next self-new forever fear for being equal participating amount of one outside the community and outside the colonizing institution medical model of disability usually helps prevent sympathize the culture and such a disability when applied to such other aspects of disabled person like education professional cultural economic recreation subjectivity purposes rather than international to the person environment of life with limited efficiency to be natural consequence of the person with significant disabilities as long as they view disability dominance and important to the opportunity to work and pursue a well-paid career but it was not contemplated and also for disabled by either disabled individuals but their families and caregivers. And the disabled movement excluded from broader movements due to discrimination. The coalition posits the key to transform society to what considered freedom. In 2000, issues of individuals with disabilities need to be placed on the par with others to have a good review for the minorities a threat to their pursuit of racial justice. After government distance for the disability rights weakness and not need for the appeals that make the ability to follow through the discussion with less than able. The ability their cause may be judged by one group demanding unlimited resources to proceed to mention the shadow of line many such and new sets of the history of people with disability not only to distinguish we absent the people with disabilities mainstream historical but very common but were free workplace focus. Certainly people with disability the lack of reference to causes of disability and future further dimensions of performance and the other groups recognition extremely important. When given such studies, and just that people with disabilities encounter more workplace discrimination than other groups, and people with disability women and minorities face some these generations have barriers in the workplace and women say there's a not mutual exclusive. We need to find accommodations, understand how we coalesce, we will have a better chance of making needed changes.
Okay, Maggie, let's talk about this Bomb 2002 evidence from www.activism.net/peace/NVCDH. Have you ever been to this website? I mean, what's the clause on this, dude?
The clause?
Yeah. I mean, this evidence makes a pretty sweet claim that you solve all nuclear war.
Do you have another copy of the card?
Well, the quals are that
Did you know this website has pornography on it?
I've been there.
That's not pornography website. It's more like.
I'll show you after it's round, but
What?
does this dude have any quals that you know?
Sure. I mean, we'll look for it.
I mean,
Alright, well, that's
to
fine.
get
I
I'll
wish.
talk somewhere else.
and
get
he
published.
provides pretty good warrants.
We
Wait,
also
did
actually
you
we have
just read
another
the
card that we read in the
highlighting
one
on
I
Hold
see.
on, Maggie, did
Huh?
you just read the highlighting on this piece of
Yes,
evidence?
I did. We actually have
Okay,
another
that's
card that
fine.
indicates
I have
that
another
the same
question.
warrants to the evidence.
I understand. Okay, you read some evidence that says. Sit down. You read some evidence that says investigating how people with disabilities are oppressed resolves the value to life for all people.
Yes.
How does the oppression of someone who's disabled resolve the value to life of someone who is not disabled or who is
Because
undergoing
it
some
eliminates
other
that mentality that we can choose who gets to live and who doesn't get to live.
Why?
Because
Why is it universal?
What do you mean? Why is it universal?
Why does this resolve the
Our
dilemma
evidence
of
says so.
value? Your evidence says so.
Yes.
So what's the warrant?
The warrant is that if we end discrimination against disabled people, then we could end that mentality that allows us to choose who gets to live and who doesn't get to live and determine.
Okay, well, this Bainton evidence says that disability has functioned historically as a justification for inequality, not just for disabled people, but covertly for women and minority groups as well. What does covertly mean?
I mean, secretively.
So what, like women and minority groups don't know about this?
What do you mean?
It's a simple
Yeah,
question.
sure. It's a covert social hierarchy.
Okay, so you're isolating the true cause of all social oppression that no one knows about except those with disabilities.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
why?
like all racism, isn't it?
What?
All instances of racism, nobody really knows about it until they point it out. Like the minorities themselves point it out.
But why is this such a universal instance of oppression? Why can't it be applied to everyone?
Because
What's the warrant for your ADA solvency evidence about how like the ADA spills over into other social struggles?
well, we don't really claim like international modeling or anything
In
like
the
that.
United States.
Well, in the United States, if we end discrimination against disabled people, then that will set a precedent
How
for
will
other
change?
instances
How will
of
that
employment
change people's
discrimination.
minds who are racist or who are sexist?
It does. This Bain evidence indicates that the concept of disability.
That Bain
and-
evidence
If
says that
those
it's
people
secret.
who are
It's a
racist or
circular
sexist
argument.
still
What's
think
the
that they
warrant?
need to say that people who have discriminate or people who have disabilities are bad, or they want to.
Okay, what if a racist
Our
person
argument is
after
that
the
that should be
plan?
rejected.
Okay, but after the plan, they can decide that maybe the plan has convinced them that people with disabilities need to be protected. But why does that affect their view on other types of oppressive?
It doesn't. They can say whatever the
It
fuck they
doesn't?
want.
Okay.
We'll take a little bit of
Tim.
2, 3, 4, then the eugenics advantage and solvency.
The first argument is the killer. The plan is void for vagueness. Little a, they jack their plan text. They aren't the American with Disabilities Act. This is not the ADA. It lacks an S following American. Their only one the evidence, solvency evidence makes it obvious that an S is required. Little b, this means that they are topical. They increase no service, provide no care. They've read advantages, show a totally different policy. Topicality is a voting issue. It's not in your jurisdiction to endorse a non-topical advocacy. And in a world of competing interpretation, they just say no link to all of our negative arguments and win on presumption. Little c, this makes the plan void for vagueness. Suits are impossible when the plan gets struck down as unconstitutional. Court doctrine proves this. Allen in 2000, they ultimately discourses engaging person crimes because they don't understand what the law rules or whatever. One of them they don't have to themselves criminal penalty. Therefore, the statute like libertarian citizen engaging prohibits both legal and constitutional protect the risk of stricter standard reviews is necessary. In some cases, the statute will always be struck down unless the court doctrine recognizes that the Americans with Disabilities Act, not the American with Disabilities Act. U.S. Code in 2003, Americans with Disabilities Act seeks to eliminate unwanted discrimination of individuals with disabilities in order to guarantee the individual opportunity to provide nation with benefit of their increased productivity. Indeed, vote negative on presumption. Their plan does nothing. This proves the counter plan is literally the only way to access any of the case. Next off is topicality increase. Little a, these definitions are going to increase and make great a larger matter of institution. Talking 2002, public health science are out of prevention disease. The organization medical nursing service or diagnostic treatment of disease. This is Larson. In 98, and services, the labor of action does not produce a tangible commodity. American Constitution and doing 2002 violation. The plan does not quantitatively increase service, merely increases access to service. The expansion of the ADA is not topical. It may have the effect of providing more public health services, mental health care, but it's not. So it is one of only a host of other effects, deeming more people disabled for the purpose of the ADA, increasing the definition of who counts as mentally ill, and they only increase access to mental health services. They don't increase the services standards, limits, limits to cases that barely increase bus rides to hospital, illegal immigrants to get mental health care. I'll do a case on limits because there are any number of ways to increase access to services. Well, the negatives will find a number of circumstances, and granted negatives all decided to be characters of all links are based on the service themselves, not their accessibility. Because all principal ground because we're preparing to make that of American service, not whether access to them is good or bad. Top 10 is voting issue, fairness, ground, and education. Next topic are criticism. The affirmative channels in competition with the systems of practice, identity politics, struggle face legally with the amount of progressive politics to seek above all redistributive measures for particular minority groups. The system of capital here pits groups against each other, fight for recognition. What gets lost, the element of universal solidarity contained within these systems finds rendering the fundamental organization principle of capital inevitable. It's Zizek in 97. The inherent sort of fluid dynamics of civil society necessity to be right to be classically excluded from the benefits of society. That classic private element of human rights that we not know who is the same phenomenon today, even structure with their non-funded class excluded from the benefits of the democratic society today, except to hold the homes get rise, the permanently gone with our systems of lightly capitalist, universal system, growing capitalism, working on capitalism, utopia, no appropriate measures for action, except utopia will be abolished, and this how much this utopia works without notion of fabulous coalitions, and the ideas of some utopian free from all practice, talking about for gay, lesbian rights of all, rights of ethnic minority, so this struggle will be united commentative equivalency, the emergency of wrong, achievements are granted the very structure and principles of today's progressive politics to establish change equivalency to their domain, particular struggles with their continually shifting and displaced connotations as the same about the repression, the key role, economic struggles, like politics, the change of equivalency among the plurality struggles strictly correlated to the silent abandonment and analysis of capitalism, global economic system, and acceptance of capitalist economic relations, unquestionable framework, and therapeutic politics plays a vital role in sustaining the invisibility of capital, which under universal structures of oppression, the affirmative closed off collective political action, the name fragmented individualized treatment. This cloud in 1998, the protection of economic class-based analysis from crowds left and axial therapy to retreat from the into the therapies and ideological grounds conception of political action that works in the discourse of social control, the political effect of the therapeutics to shut down, possibility of public deliberation, collective engagement with politics, the latest more to emphasize the debilitating consequence of therapeutic discourse of those working on social change. Therapeutic narratives neutralize anger and obscure the destructive power to which we come to see our location and our work in the fragmentation of universal collective engagement with the system with capital makes identity struggles like the plan seem only possible outlet for change. The refusal to break free of this fragmentation makes the global annihilation inevitable. As in Mazzaro's in 95, the solutions are never really questioned. They're merely obscurely contained in the identity state and thereby contained in represent no day longer need danger disruption or explosion things contain identity as of one form the other true reconciliation. The latter carries within our position of that peace with the extent of ruling out not partial wars, but another all-out war, the inevitable annihilation of humankind applied by such wars results as equals antagonism in the system as a whole are aggravated. It becomes unavoidable to confront the disturbing truth that consider microcosm themselves was the object of radical truth. You want to find a way to overcome the incorrigible destructive discapital social metabolic order that challenge directly arising through contradictions in direction of circulation brought by the highest identity intensity to the capital's fully completed global enterprise. And the role of your ballot is to reassert the universal struggle in the face of the fragmentation of politics. Use the suffering of the 1AC as a vehicle to appeal for a broader challenge to capital's role in structuring systems of oppression by rejecting particular strict struggles and reasserting the necessary of collective political action. This is Cloud in 98. The alien conditions late but really rendered obsessed with the effects of project themselves, the project no substantial, a substantive of the traditional collective struggle, the emancipation, the purpose of this work that we got to argue for the alternative therapy, most marks of politics, the public working class struggle for the common good, denoting the essential potential dimension of human life, and the epicenter person of the historical conduct, not a passive victim of economic forces. His transformation cannot happen if the agents of behavior of private, isolated individuals. Rather, they must enter the public struggle with all others to share their interests in changing society. The practice liberal definition of public, which puts an idealized public interest in policy debate. I argue for the conception of the public sphere constituted in by struggle. The struggle assumes that suffering, exploitation, oppression are real, not merely discursive products. The rhetoric of therapies pervaded much of social life and plays on the most fair understanding and self-society. The system of oppression and exploitation of thrive are able to come together, meet voice, the ability to use identities like paratroop, phenomenal isolation and fragmentation. And the part continues. We act rituals of self-intervention and transformation will locate ourselves in increasing complex work therapeutic rituals from programs attached by emotional support and unity, tribal cover, getting back on the public structural and material force and influential lives. We should look to harass and critical theory, public anecdotes of therapy, wings, counter-rhetoric therapy, discourse, consider society, not individual suffering, needs adjusting, the most activism and fatigue are necessary, revitalization of collective activity, organized from below, demanding justice and freedom, and the eugenics advantage. The next off, sorry. The counterplan, the United States Supreme Court should mandate that the provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act guarantee confidentiality for mental health care. We'll clarify the counterplan solve the case before can change the way the ADA is implemented. This use as new requirement to the Supreme Court has issued a number of decisions that have dramatically increased the way ADA is interpreted in most cases, contrary to what Congress intended. One decision stripped the rights of state workers and sue their employers for money, violated for damages. With most recently in Toyota Motor Vehicle related respective view about what it takes to demonstrate a disability under the ADA. Supreme Court's interpretation of the sort of thought and how large things to the original intent of Congress and President Bush. The Supreme Court promised something a robust and promotional policy that guarantee equal opportunity for all people with disabilities, and and courts can broaden definitions of beneficiaries, i.e. do the plan. This court Gazette in 2003, according to the federal ADA, disabilities are predicted to descend to substantially limitable danger life activity qualified for the job performance. Employers can't discriminate for reasons of disability must offer reasonable accommodation to enable personal work. The federal courts will be more restrictive definition for particular disabilities in contrast to California's Supreme Court. However, with the liberal interpretation of disability standard, the California court defined disability that limits a major life activity as opposed to the federal standards of limits. I don't have to dissent version.
Oh, yeah, I'm just going to okay.
The eugenics admit. First, another evidence is predictive. It doesn't indicate that providing care would necessarily get rid of the social Darwinist movements, and their impacts is inevitable because the forces that cause the social Darwinist movements would still expose confidentiality, solvency will. There's no substance change. No one applies serious attention to CPDAs. This Switzer in 2001 of the ADA follows the cycle plan of public disinterest. The ADA really did show compared to found at the top of mainstream process coverage changes with negative conservative to the ADA and government interference in public and private houses. Usually accompanied by government interference. A lot of this case when individuals reportedly filed a frivolous claim and the way Bush wanted policy pressure won't now turn tax stuff. The way Bush policy pressure won't work now. Business week to 5-5. The board has back top of 77 states where fish Dawkins centers with the minor Democrats and vote the strategy may not do much to get full tax or Rooks said Bush won't win any votes by shooting out of Congress like Iraq, and the measly healthcare compromise became passive dividends. The New York Times 212 calls the moderators and cut death on the dividend pass. So the different folks will all be justified. The president realizes dialogue called social quota after urging Bush to add additional funds to a plan for cash out states and pay for health insurance, and sees the impact of one tax cuts which will be counting open new services take with this. Bush has always opposed the accelerating federal government. Pretty much shows a very scary clip. He can set up ways or blindly up the cliff for years hence, aligning part of the rocks of them guys from Blaze, which was supposed to keep in the rocks from Texas and governments like the red during the economic recovery like Christina Day, no problem. Which comes from the South and runs against strong grand deficits year after year with no sight and end. Expanding national debt to tell about it. Of course, the economic recovery so those rates higher interest rates will growth and cost of jobs later in the decade. We're throwing a boomerang that will come around and beat us. And world causes World War III. Made in 1998. There's a financial market so the biggest immediate effect on world peace. Think about the Great Depression. The biggest impact was World War II. The world economy crashed far enough, and we stopped playing the person's right and start a new round of Saving Private Ryan and no mental health care sovereignty. There's no training. This is Switzerland in 2001. Even more than some education about the ADA has been done to healthcare providers, more education needed, more help to provide access to officers, more improve healthcare practice for persons with disabilities, and incentive to help raise consciousness in the rest of the community about the ADA. And there's no enforcement. Switzerland in 2001 to 20 studies points out a vague legislative language, lack of enforcement, varying levels of participation, evidence of duplication of effort, non-compliance with the statute.
How are you running the counter? How do we straight turn it?
Alright, here's the deal. It's kind of complicated. Constitutionality means if you straight turn, we have to go for it. If you permit it or make any theory argument other than dispo bad, we can kick it. We can only read one counterplan and one critique alternative, and we can't cross-apply contradictory affirmative arguments from different worlds of meaning.
Okay, thank you. All right, your counterplan had the Americans with Disabilities Act. So can we perm that S?
It still doesn't make the capital.
Why?
Because the permutation is not the plan.
Yeah.
Why not? Where's your... Okay, what are the standards for your vagueness argument?
What?
What are the standards for your vagueness argument?
Okay, if you do the American with Disabilities Act,
That is not the Americans with Disability Act. That act does not exist.
Which
There is
means
no
that-
American
Right, but
with
you don't have
Disability
any reasons why vagueness is bad.
Okay, we have zero ground against the American with
What
Disabilities.
ground loss do you have from
We
having
can't
from
read a
excluding an
politics they
S?
said because none of our links apply since you don't actually.
You can
do it.
clarify out of every argument we make in the 2AC by saying we are the American with
spelling
Disability Act.
Yeah,
Sorry,
you fucked up.
up.
We're not sorry for you.
Alright. Your evidence that indicates the Supreme Court will solve, it says the Supreme Court always acts contradictory to the way Congress intended. Our evidence indicates that Congress wants to end discrimination against employment.
No, that evidence
which
is
the Supreme
the
Court would
warrant
have to
in that
counter to that.
The warrant in that claim is that even when Congress wants to interpret something one way, the court can interpret it to be broader. That's not saying that the court would
Your
necessarily
evidence
make it.
does not say that.
Yes, it does. The
Right.
argument is that in the past, when Congress has tried to restrict the size
What is
of
the text? Okay,
ADA
that's
what?
fine. What's the text to your alternative?
The tag of the alternative code.
Okay, so what is it?
Alternatives
I
to
can read
reject
it
the
to you
method
again.
of the
Okay,
1AC.
read it to me again.
The role of your ballot is to reassert the universal struggle in the face of the fragmentation of politics. Use the suffering of the 1AC as a vehicle to appeal for a broader
Okay,
challenge.
so what's the link to
I'm
your
not done.
critique?
But
Alright, so what's the link to your critique?
the link is the way that you utilize therapy. Our argument is that instead of struggling from an individualized therapeutic perspective, which blames individuals for societal problems,
So
the
how does
better
that
way
apply
to
to, wait, can you apply that to the context of the plan?
Yes, there's that link as well as argument that framing your struggle around people with disabilities as the central factor in universal oppression system, it causes this identity politics of fragmentation where every every oppressed group thinks that it's their right and that they need to look for themselves how the way oppression has worked against them has actually covertly worked against every other group, and that they
So
have
what
to
does the
espouse their own.
alternative do?
The alternative is to recognize the universal thing they all have in common, which is that therapy personalizes the
To
responsibility
recognize
for
that oppressive
oppression.
people can...
And I mean, like, even if you win
No, it's
arguments
about
as to why therapy is good, we'll win that you're starting. You have no justification for why therapy is a good starting point for resistance. We'll win that a universal starting point is better.
Yeah, when you try to universalize your call through just
What do you
the
mean
fact that they are,
universalize?
where you say that you resolve all value to life, etc., and you don't have a warrant for that, is the link.
Then increase public health services. Then eugenics. Then solvency. Courts. I put politics on a different sheet of paper.
I'm sorry, did you say vagueness?
Vagueness, T.
Yeah.
Eugenics, solvency. The courts. Politics. The critique. It's after...
That's your eugenics.
Yeah. Straight after case. Yeah.
Listening to this argument is stupid. We beyond enforcement of the ADA, and normal means would mean that that the acronym would be used anyway because it is shorter, which means that it's easier to use. Also, permutation on the counterclaim with soft arguments back. Also, competing interpretations back. Number one, it leads arbitrary exclusion just to exclude out the one here, which just swipes for inside, which is swipe fairness, which is the reason doc exists in the first place. Number two, it swipes if you don't set a precedent in this round, which means that there's no potential for abuse. And then also the set up my argument about whether it would just be normal use the acronym ADA, which means the plaintiffs will solve and enforcement is guaranteed, and there's also no abuse. We would defend the ADA in this round. There's no shifting of absolute. If we made a mistake, don't punish us by voting us down, and maybe as long as the argument will win, why we turn back the other arguments. And politicians are an idiot. They're going to know that it's the Americans with Disability Act, and it doesn't matter because even no matter what we provide confidentiality to all mental health care. It doesn't matter if we amend it. It doesn't matter if we amend that law. We provide confidentiality, which is part of solvency evidence. It's specific to also all solvency evidence assumes the ADA, and we amend that because the ADA doesn't specific to Americans with plurality or anything like that. Because we still solve, and we still solve. Now to the increase. One we need laws against discrimination, mental health care, as a public health service. We modify those laws to increase protections. People in 1990, the Direction of Federal Laws, governmental plans to provide the basic public health services, discrimination based on race, gender, and natural health, and also their 10 essential public health services. We modify them, particularly the components concerning regulation and access, public health foundation. In 1994, essential public health services will force laws and regulations to provide health and service safety, and the people need public health services to show the provision of health care when otherwise unavailable. Number three, contribution increases make new rand the amounts reached in 1991. The way we meet the point of stopping new policy discrimination may depend on the impediment of life activity standards. Will be the fact that we made about our interpretation just proves the arbitrary nature of their violation. What is modification? And what is the new policy? There's no bright line. Also, now, your interpretation potentially modifies the increase. Non-public health services means you can't qualify the increase by specifying subsidized population increasing. Is thus anti-resolutional. And also, it can be their interpretation that little and low limits are referred to infinite ways to modify existing policy. And little bit kills uniqueness. And also, in our cases, meet the no case meets in the purpose of top cavities and initiate discussion. If that first doesn't fill, there's no reason why to go to top cavities. This leads to arbitrary exclusion. And we're only topical. Okay, eugenics. Groups of debate we solve eugenics because we stop confidential because we provide confidential. We need to know genetic testing. We don't claim to solve all the reasons why life is bad or anything like that or restore life. We just argue that we stop discrimination against people with disabilities. Go to solvency. And the first argument to make is that we don't need to solve this societal change. That's a Switzer evidence. That's not true. Except for one, they see evidence indicating that giving value to the disabilities and passing confidentiality would give mental health care to people with disabilities, make them equal, put them on equal footing with everyone else who receives health care in the status quo, which means that we want to solve societal change. And even if we don't solve societal change, institutional change, which means we solve accurate impact. They say we don't solve mental health care. That assumes a different plan text for running something different. Of course. One case, a detached counterclaim that's nuclear war genocide caused by the exceptions to inheritance. The other one would be statutory language substantial limitation of major life activity or the confidential argument. As long as this language is there, the government will be able to hustle mental disability claims. It will be caused by step 2 that resolves the specific to amending the ADA or can amend the ADA when we interpret it, which means that it can never solve caused by impossible caused by the middle 2007 specific to the ADA. It's caused by congressional law and its ability to change societal attitudes along the appointment of societal attitudes. Number 2, even if the best Supreme Court decisions on disabilities just produce backlash and eventually undermine Matthew Dillon 2000 by acknowledging the fact that people with disability problems based on racial minorities and rights movement the case on the ADA and the general that do the change in courts to give away the laws of disclosures. Also, their disclosures are uniquely that little starting around there, the blue grass will lead to make the blade tank fighting little beats from the ground. All pieces of these 7 supports a straight turns to every game because they have 13 minutes of black little C. Multiple words are uniquely advantageous by negative running 50 counterpoints or excuse to tragedy little Z counterphrase negative add 1 discount counterpoint or 1 take a plain counterpoint will leave 1 to give a voting competitive equity firm and also firm do both. You add the S or at the end of American Disability Act also firm do both at both agencies act and also turn to get the court back for disability floppy and solve the linkages that's systematic to the whole judicial landscape delivered 2000 the evidence of the rights model economy disability the agency focused on rights of the judiciary and working the ADA also. The Supreme Court duly terminated June 3rd. The court will strike down Michigan policies, UPI, to India 5/1/2003. The sometimes the Supreme Court last things to do the constitutional Moscow law respects the Michigan policies going to fail, but I don't think that it will have a consideration called B is the link that test case mandates immediate Supreme Court action which pushes the affirmative action cases off the docket right in 1988. The taxes groups can use legislation considerable including test cases to demonstrate over the legal extension of competing back for part of the district group lobby to the courts. And number 2, when the Supreme Court has to make a decision to maximize policy, the counterclaim mandates the cases are lost right in 1988. This is not say the judge acting without the straight up flashing efficient for its policy and devotees for policy implications policy political savings and make the lady docket and it does without no one to hold policy as long as that's actually what the top set we long court now company given strong gravity here the use and also federal action to end race-based affirmative action is crucial. Solve global ethnic conflict. Pay attention. This card is freaking smoke in Koran in 1988 after the charge of advancing the United States for to make the world of death with liberty American civilization and general American political equal contributes healthy global understanding this is attitude and the global law will go on to rule the company of the United States and world and conflict the U.S. in relation to the United States and only to be that authority inspiration United States is convented to the actual meaning positive sensitive about United States advanced goal of liberty and resources and the ethnicity for the national policy upon Americans to pay close attention to the ethnicity that have been characterized during the article of policy statements that celebrate rights and the American public emphasize the negative dimension of American ethnic relations, although might be that sense of duality, American melting pot, the American will fuel that wagon that will reducing ethnic rights to the 20th century lost economic growth, spread the 20% like the lose strength, the political improvement act in the United States, global decline in ethnic assimilation, the affirmative America, discourse of official policies, bullshit actions, and the democratized ethnic diversity is accordingly they serve as a watershed event, so we would consider it probably incumbent politics and ethnic wars lead to extinction. This is dated 1990, the world stands to move likely to engage in the conflict like the Civil War, and so we're going to and the state wars intensity to accident of the states, also making the cool one likely one very proud possibility accident unauthorized raider, and the Mexican conflict also trying to dominate borders of the country and threatening American allies. Now go to politics by partisanship now, use 2033 American legislation by George Bush, and the bill passed for bipartisan support for in the House and number 2 more evidence, LA Times 2003 Democrats had a bill bipartisanship, dominate House and report Democrats and also Republicans, and also there's no change to the link. Democrats want to accept all rich the Washington Post 2003 bolded by rapid military attack for Iraq War, and first the open challenge of popular war by releasing neither side were willing to compromise and also their bipartisan mental health care legislation just passed right now. U.S. News Wire 2003. The United States presidential they approved the bill making law approved the academic results for children with disabilities, but the idea got involved bipartisanship both behind also AIDS. Bill was concession in Chicago Tribune 2003. Democrats and British whether support expansion place funding they recap certain rights of the president. You have to find every step and the way for money is welcoming to government Congress and also the planes on popular GOP American Healthline. In 2001 Bush had to support rights for people with disabilities by private army. The opposition Republican Congress for influence being stated opposition also delay hates a plain whole 2001 delay as strong attack the Indian radio legislation offer articles appeared to media and Bush conceded Democrats will label Republican backlash Newsweek in 2002 Bush calling it up and Ross in charge of for the president how to cancel started control the shaking assignments and left in control the former Trump control key position may lay into circle on rivalry over the most reports mine of continued running Democrats and Bush and Patrick got the vice link and people that should happen to defense from the blessing the other resort of bringing to a politics work 70 copying the advice called words for time leading the making revolt see that their books like the father really true right now these King and also is a GOP insider and also the economy is bad LA Times in 2003 now immediate boosts in economy productivity and the economy now go to the criticism there's good delay critical thinking also more about government how we like children will be focuses is good in increasing political ground like counterclaims just has to go away and people and counter interpretation of attitude is whether the debate fiat or not and they can want to see because when we read fiat based events they can take fiat better and want to see it's useless also disabled movements excluded from broader movements due to discrimination that isn't the one to see because disabled movements are not working inside the only way to do that is to identity politics which identifies with disabled movements which will be the only way to solve and also from the alternative to the plan also there is zero link to this argument we didn't say that we should all value of life but we stop degradation of the value of people discriminating against and disabilities rights and also the division of the disability movement right there's a powerless and acceptance stigmatization all for 1990 the movement to grasp with the political identity mirror and disabilities of programs and implement coalesce broke together in social inferiority some quasi identity politics argument is a unique link turn and it also often skips the alternative because the alternative doesn't have identity politics which are necessary for the disability movement to solve the only way for the disability movement to solve is to come together and recognize that disabilities of political action used to disempower the state also alternative use no tax they don't have alternative tax it's also to movement target choice from Jake Grant it's also for the condition they can condemn time create multiple use screwing our time it's utopian alternative possible view and destroys our ground also picks our ground destroy picks our bad destroys for by claiming flake advantages are solved by the government also it's a voting issue for equity and also yeah that's fine
We need the theory box here on every slide.
there you go.
Is fiat good a theory argument?
Yes.
Why don't we have a text?
Huh? Why don't we have a text?
Let me see it then.
Yeah, but what's your link to this text argument?
You said after the one and C that we have a text one tag, yeah.
I was going to
Sorry, do we have to answer that argument?
Sure, yeah.
Is there a link?
Well, our argument is that even if you have a text, it's probably more vague than ours is. Even though we have a spelling.
Now the argument's vague, so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, alright.
Yes, the warrant still applies moving
So,
forward.
what's your justification for identity politics? You just repeat a bunch of times that it's key to forming a disability movement. I don't understand why that's true.
Well, the evidence from the 1AC and the 2A that I read indicates that unless people with disabilities coalesce together, they will never be politically active.
Why is
the
it
only way
necessary
for
to identify that resistance in terms of their disability?
Why?
Yes.
Oh, because that's the only thing that brings them together.
That's the only thing that brings them
Yeah.
together? I mean, what about, like, structures and stuff that oppress them and
What?
oppress other
You're just
people
being
also?
vague. What
do you
brings
mean,
them
what am I
together?
being vague? Like, the way that, like, things
Don't
that
answer
cause...
the question.
What? Yes, dude. You gotta answer the input.
What? I'm trying to answer your question, but I need to know.
I don't understand why their disability is a more unique form of resistance than resisting power structures.
First of all, it's what the plan does. Link turns your argument because we allow these identity politics.
You allow universal struggles that aren't constituted in therapy.
No, that's the point of the
Identity
link.
politics
It's
are
not a
linked
universal struggle. It's a disability movement.
Yes,
That's our link argument.
No.
So why do you
well, then we're internal link turning your argument that you have to have identity in your movement to solve.
Why?
The 1AC evidence indicates that a fractured disability movement, i.e. one that doesn't have an identity, will never effectuate political change
What's the
because it will
warrant
always be
for-
fragmented.
Wait, but that's
That's
Have you ever read
circular.
the
You said
Christian
it's
cards?
fragmented, so it won't change because it's fragmented.
No,
What does
I
that
didn't.
mean?
I said it's fragmented, so it will never effectuate policy change.
What is the warrant?
Look,
for
in a
that?
democratic system, you have to have a majority, right? You have to have a large number of people to effectuate change in a government.
If you have a
or policy.
justification of, even if you justify your identity politics argument, do you have a justification for doing it in the framework of therapy?
In therapy?
Yes.
Well, we don't do it in therapy.
In
We do it
mental
dis-
health care.
We don't do it in mental health care. We do it in disability.
Wait, what about the plan says disability? I mean,
That doesn't mean
you
we have
said
to
for
defend.
mental health care.
That doesn't mean that we have to defend that the movement will.
So
you're not
will
defending the
defend
plan?
mental health care?
What do you mean we're not defending the plan? The plan provides
Stop, hold on.
confidentiality.
This
Yeah.
is really important.
Yeah.
You will not defend mental health care vis-a-vis our critique link.
What are you talking about? We'll defend that we give mental health care, but
Okay,
we will
that's how
defend
we're
that we mobilize movements in the context of disability identity.
All right, let's talk about the.
But we'll defend we give mental health care. You're right.
Let's talk about the vagueness argument. Why do you get to make the permutation your plan?
What? I don't understand.
Like you said, the permutation.
The
would solve this
permutation
argument.
would solve like all the reasons why the counter.
What if we
why the
don't
plan
go for
would
the
solve.
counterplan?
Well, then we can't go for the permutation.
And
Sorry.
so then.
But there's no solvency differential to the counterplan in the plan. We still solve.
838.
You can't claim an advantage off of you spell it right. We don't.
USDA. Followed by solvency. Then the counter plan. After the counter plan is a critique. There's an overview on the critique.
Which not comfort to one to concede bipartisan now, which means the task is passed doubly to seem three can receive mental health care bipartisan support passed now, which means that our link and their link turns inevitable. The bottom debate seeing the economy is down now, which means they can't win a risk of link turn even if they do concede win a link turn. The economy is down now, so even if taxes kill, it doesn't fucking matter. So it says you don't need to win the societal change, all you have to win the institutional change. Keep on. This is not true. We'll win that our evidence indicates that there won't be any societal changes. The ADA would. The ADA would not be modeled through society because people don't listen to it. Additionally, our evidence indicates that you have to train people in order to enforce the mandates of the ADA. The plan just extends the ADA, which is not enough. Additionally, their solvency evidences are linked to the critique when they talk about how the institutional changes key to solve all oppression. Their evidence indicates that that would spill over, but there's no warrant for that, which is the link to our identity politics criticism now. Counterclaim. Not going for a first permutation where he tries to get out of his fuck up on spelling. This is an illegitimate permutation. Don't allow to extend it to solve use. It functionally severs that portion of the plan text because it would sever the part where the act on ability doesn't yet exist. Textual competition is bad because it allows them to use the ban the plan counterplan and eliminates all types of strategy and debate that you should not reward them for misspelling their plan text in the finals of the TOC. This is all going to be in the 1NR. Don't allow him to go for this permutation now. He said we'll win our framework debate on the critique outweighs all of these policy implications. These disads don't matter at the point where we're not going. Or the critique permutation do both. They'll win. That's a testable link, which means the counterplan is not competitive. Dispositional pitch group the debate. Go A options. One single best policy after three debate about finding best course correct and both such pick practice best course top two real common splits and tries mind modifications spills all the time. That's key education. That's policy education. Key negative ground. Not place picks include some part of one C can be by conceding solid state counterplans and essential things. Systemic cards case after playing big advantage. And win without any of the reports explained. Fight the after right stop cookies sports and plans only can stop back and prove Robert should have to defend the perm. All the elements 4 perms are worth the academic petition permutation. Pick out of the parts of the combination possible breakable to 1 AR will do. Choose 2 and C strikes voting
which takes all the options to place and lands focus spaces both have to have to defend the alternative resolution for focus force for education predictability and some counter interpretation. We only read one counterplan, one complete alternative checks of their abuse arguments because you don't value potential abuse and they concede our multiple others spike out of all of their options because we can't cross apply. Arguments of the world of uniqueness will be defense 1 air 95 first class speech 1 speech true and the proper true and 2 inside unique stats close pick because once he maintains some attachment chief sending to the resolution for a big district just by check has found affirmative support competition done by Tom and there enough evidence of the ones by the plan to count by the checks speech that there isn't theories of replication theories assumes only a burden is to get one seed reject the argument after human abuse is sufficiently small to require valid and defense wins and next.
Critique. Overview.
Social systems like capital create the conditions to make violence and oppression possible. The affirmative reduces politics to identity-based bickering between groups for recognition of their struggle, in particular demands for change. In addition, the politics is one grounded in therapeutics, channeling the spark of collective struggle against the original system of violence into individualized treatments isolated from the larger social context. Instead, we should privilege politics over the therapeutic, making an appeal for universal struggle free from the straitjacket of constraints of identity. The ballot is not about whether or not therapy is appropriate, but whether a universal politics should precede the therapeutic. The 2AC has no defense of the ability of their starting point to break down to generate opposition to social systems. Universal struggle addresses a set of interconnected social relationships that marks the genuine starting point for political engagement. And the next 2AC in one theatrical group, first of all, theory creates reality, not the other way around. However, 97, the outcomes of time increasing important coding power legitimacy, requires very most become reality in the sense of being regretted with reality, reality, shape theory, the reverse progress into theory becomes interdependent that leads compared to red ideology, certain power, the competence of ideology, though I think the powerful power so dictate something fierce theory, something didn't expect people, and the claim doesn't actually pass its back. We all know the government will do nothing, sign about affirm whatever the impacts they claim. To proceed frames of people never occurs to terminal takeout to all of their offense. The only thing that matters is the overall advocacy of the firm, and that it comes their entire advocacy has nothing to do with the outcome, which signed the plain law and focusing on policy making exclusively is bad destroys. Just because Kurzynski, the impacts argument is our evidence and the one seen in reality, because absent our critical project will just grow up to be cogs in the machine. Even if the government were listening to policies they advocate, you say about them as a political being or a subject are more important than what they actually do. We conceded our 1NC framework for the debate. It should be about the method. This is just like an academic paper. They presented it to you. If this paper is flawed, you should reject it. Vote for them next year if they run a good F. 2AC number 6. And the next argument says it doesn't destroy topic firms still have to provide. They should do something justifying it. Is at the core of what the resolution acts doesn't destroy negative grounds. We can choose to engage the app on the consequence of their actions or the assumption concept of political identity. That's a negative choice. It's not the affirmative. Doesn't destroy affirmative grounds. Sorry, but you have to provide a warrant for why. Judge vote for claims tantamount placing voting issues on the sets because you're unprepared to defend yourself against them, even though you can't wear your own facts against them. There's plenty of ground about why the words you speak are good. And there's always going to be an offense-defense debate, which means none of their interventionist narrative arguments make sense, and it's not. And 2AC says disabled movements won't work, but this is our link argument that they generate an identity politics based on the disabled that are universalizing their claim on the oppression into every other systemic group. When they see evidence provides link clearly articulating across the 1C when they saw it says that they would be able to reduce would be able to solve the value of life to every group. This is our 1NC evidence indicates that's called a balkanization. The Zizek evidence means that the political groups will say that their form of oppression covertly is the same as everyone else's form of oppression. They'll be fragmented when they try to universalize their struggles. The only universal thing they have in common is that therapy and capital has bracketed them off into these different subgroups, and therapy individualizes the blame of the oppression on them. They have not answered our therapy claim, which means that that's a face of reason to reject the plan, whether or not they win the rest of their advocacy is good. And he says permutation, group prefers still links to lay identity. They struggles don't just leave out question capital. They actually make investigation possible. Permutation leaves group pit against each other, destroy commitment to universalize. As usually happens a little bit. Then review the collective pricing check by condition precious individualized, fact by therapeutic politics. That's clouded and true trade off the AD. And you toward universal struggles diverting to battle between groups actually enables invigoration capital. Zizek 97. Cultural capital, the first cultural life, which promotes the appearance of the opposite mass capital, universal systems, effectively substance practice of facts, longer lasting, take the idea of eventually capitalism, and I place like the capitalism here to state critical entry concepts and now fighting culture complete the basic homogeneity capitalist world, and it has to be fighting for PC value, rights, ethnic, lesbian, different lifestyles, so on, world capital, to track and march, states, critical theory, gas culture, like the other sort of things, other states, development, stop, starts, participate in biological culture, massive presence, physical, triple, fine culture, critical theory mentioned, capitalism, world, the system tends to give rights, and essentially fundamental, and other crimes, that benefit your verification are, it solves the case between you vote negative consumption, and 3 containment, therapeutic politics contains the explosive potential struggles in the face of oppression. Cloud 98. Potential counter-biological theories movements are undermined what we created therapies possible of one track of proponents to defend revolutions of strength feeds often chaotic therapy to restore change the reform track of which circumstance for example psychological administration moral level progressive very corresponding series of moderate but beneficial reforms industrial capitalism personal society transparency political strategy of gradual culture consciousness or so strategy of political disengagement without advice to disrupt relation class within public strategy of collect class and performing that case only for what the current system will not truly see before. He says that there's no link crossed by above that our Zizek evidence Amendments 285 says division to cause disability powerlessness. Our alternative solves the case because we coalesce around a universal form of oppression, i.e. the therapeutic individual is possible once a cloud and phenomenal, and the impact turns the case because capitalism is the root cause of ideology of disability, division of humans, disabled workers, and disabled as product of the capital, but dividing useful from wasteful. The reason that physical disabilities are observed as code is deficiency depend on the underlying logic. The codes itself, human people can consume or produce label cogs and theories of capitalism, and their argument destroys the value of life. That's our Mazzaro sentence in the 1 and C, and this is more evidence will be later. But next argument, it says identity politics is key. It's a unique term, you must recognize it, but it doesn't answer our impact evidence. So what it means that it will eventually copy, doesn't extend any warrants in their evidence, and they're just a simulation of reform. This is Regal and Williams, 2008, leads to produce a counter-capacity product which from discrimination, equality, between people, misguided people in the shield state, cost of reunification, based on the time of remembering people, and recognition, vision of the book, state, cost-based state, essentially equality, there's federal endorsement, equality, second position, majority spoke, takes out gift of equality, embodies to legitimate countermate services, secure the hands of majority, the possible prime minority, gives of behavior, majority people exists, simulacrum of equality of psychological illness of real social political progress. And the next argument says that the abuse with no text, we have a text. It's not big. It's a text. We want to see a text. This is all conceded, and the basic conditionality argument. This is answered on the counterclaim debate, and pixel debate will be answered in the 1R. It's on our impact evidence. Mazzaro takes the capitalism extinction outcome, which means we solve the root cause of their harms, and they don't solve any of the case. Additionally, it solves. Here's another impact. Mazzaro 95. Stops expansion or accumulation, everything they have prosecution can get something normality, revolution, psychotic block, destruction goes on social economic progress, even no signals up. Going center revealed, including 2 world wars.
All right, can you explain what exactly the alternative does?
The alternative has the ballot say that the therapeutic method that tries to treat individuals for social oppression, mental illness, as you say, is flawed because it blames the individual and isolates the cause of that oppression somewhere within the individual's mind. Our argument is that the harms of the 1AC are created by a system of capital, which influences the way that people's response to social oppression is constructed. We can recognize that. That's a reason to vote negative, just to reject that flawed isolation of where the problem is caused. Additionally, our alternative recognizes that the universal thing every oppressed group has in common is that the system of capital brackets them off into separate categories and makes them fight against each other in order to gain the gifts of the system, which is what our reject evidence and
right. I understand that, but all of our evidence in the 1AC and the 2AC indicates that they're already fragmented. Unless we do the plan, unless we give them an identity, it will always be fragmented.
This isn't like uniqueness.
No, it is actually, because the alternative doesn't solve that. Because how does the alternative solve that? Actually,
I just explained that we would isolate the universal thing everyone has in common, which is that the system of capital brackets us off into different subgroups. Just what I said. It's true. If the judge votes for us, that means the judge recognizes that is a fact.
That people are united because they've been oppressed, or something like that?
That everyone.
How does that not link to your Ergo and Williams evidence? It indicates that
you're not understanding. Everyone has something in common. That thing is that capitalism has affected our lives and our identity and categorized us into separate groups that we can identify with. And then it tries to give us gifts of equality so we can fight against each other for more gifts from the system and more representation within the capitalist system. Additionally, we can recognize that therapy blames the individual, whereas alternatively, it's the societal causes of oppression which are the root of mental illness, and therapy only makes the problem worse. Those are two things that we reject in the
Okay, so how does your alternative solve the case?
Alternative solves the case because if we can recognize the universal thing everyone has in common, that's the only way.
So how come we can't recognize the universal and the individual at the same time?
1AC equals mental health care. 2NC equals mental health care bad.
What?
It's that simple. Our argument is that
no. But your alternative assumes identity politics. If we permute that, then we can solve all the reasons why giving a gift is bad. Because no longer are we giving a gift to an individual identity or an individual group. We're giving a gift to everyone.
The first link argument is about identity politics and balkanization of groups. The second link argument is universal, that therapy blames individuals and makes them politically complacent.
Okay, so the permutation would... Okay, well then explain this trade-off argument.
The trade-off argument says that people's resources in combating capital are limited, which means that if we do the plan and the alternative, it's just simply not.
We need 1 second.
Yeah, I think so.
The peace debate, then, an overview on vagueness, followed But, I mean, I guess you can put that somewhere, because then I'm going to go to the bottom of the increased debate and then the vagueness line. I mean, you can put the overview at the top of vagueness. I'm just going to answer one argument on the increased debate.
Sorry.
The PICS debate and the counterplan. There's an overview on vagueness, and then I'm going to answer the last argument on increase, and then the line by line on vagueness. PICS are good to lay off. It's one best policy option based on finding best course of action. Another best course of education provides more course having faith and keeping to a kid. Ground up capital things they include some part of the ONEC capitalists are essential debating system of Thomas absent cases of the big advantages that can without the kid three skill minority things worth the afterwards plan through. It's a security boost education particularly and it's a new act which we have to be able to brain on PICS in order to get on the ground against you can't solve the argument and for check prospect after the right extra topical or do so portion of the plan which only pick and solve back in age capital just by PICS which will be able to work with the process as a real process formation and plan is focused the debate they build the house which after the alternative versions will focus on the worst education and ability cap plan is not a pick. Fundamental differences in the agent proves it's the opposite of the one you see in literature checks. We have specific evidence on why the pick is better. It's predictable. The solvency evidence in the context of the counterplan overview. Stotts said this argument's pretty silly, but I think it's even more silly that Greenhill's going to lose the finals of the TOC on this argument because they screwed up the plan. There's a pretty clear distinction here. Our argument is that they have to spell the bill of the text correctly. We read evidence in the one I see, but they don't dispute that the bill that they're actually trying to do is the Americans with Disability Act. However, if you read the context after the debate, you will find out that it actually says the American with Disability Act. There's a few reasons to vote for college prep because of this. First of all, they're not topical. They don't increase any public health services or provide mental health care. Proves they're just out of your jurisdiction and skews grounded limits because of the fact that we can't read. We don't know whether they can spike out of our dissent, and we can't read the American with Disabilities Act because that act doesn't exist. Competing interpretation means they could have spiked out of our dissent and all of our case arguments even if they didn't, which was a better standard for evaluating the debate. Second argument, even if I concede that Congress would know that it was the Americans with Disability argument, he concedes the argument that the Supreme Court would strike down the plan because of the too vague to be constitutional standard. That's the Allen evidence that we read in the 1NC, and here's some more. The court would strike down the affirmative because it's too big. This Allen in 2000 would break this principle comes to the repost from the court to make this explain the basic doctrines and to reverse principles which are the ordinary citizen able to understand the law prohibits in order to be conformable to with the second principle so arbitrary enforcement by officials themselves do not clearly understand what the law prohibits. Even if Congress knows the plan does, the Supreme Court would strike it down. They have no answer to this argument. Don't make any new arguments in the 1A arguments on this. The third argument is that presumption. The United States Code evidence, we read in the 1NC, proves that the Act doesn't do anything because the United States Code only recognizes a bill which is called the Americans with Disabilities Act. It means the Act doesn't do anything, even in the world of their permutation or their clarification arguments. It's silly because you have to evaluate the debate based on its context. In the world where the Act doesn't provide anything or do anything substantial because they modify a bill that doesn't exist, you have to err negative on presumption. Otherwise, they can always clarify out of a bit of badly written context, and they would win debates on actually don't do anything. You have to err negative on a world where they don't do anything. Well, additionally, we'll win evaluating the debate based on the context and any clarifications is more important. First of all, it's a new Act. The 1AC context is necessary because we didn't know what the 1AC prep time is necessary because we didn't know what was going to happen during the debate, and we needed that time to prepare. And second of all, the 1AC is especially heated ground. We have to be able to plan out our dissents and stuff while they're reading the 1AC, and we don't have to necessarily, if we don't ask them about it in context, we wouldn't find out what their plan actually does until the 2AC. We have to be able to look at the 1AC and determine what their plan text does. Additionally, competing interpretations, even if they didn't spike out of our dissent, they could have. They could have said the American with Disabilities Act is different from the Americans with Disabilities Act, and they could have gotten out of our politics link. They could have gotten out of all of our solvency arguments. We'll win that. That's a better way to evaluate the debate, and it's about in-round strategy, time, and abuse, not whether or not the Congress would know whether they solve or not. Additionally, plan text is the least arbitrary way to determine jurisdiction. Not whether Saad's argument makes sense in the 2AC, but you have to determine your jurisdiction on whether you can vote on this argument in based on the context of the 1AC. On the bottom of the on the other two violations, they say counter-interpretation only RF. This is no, it's completely arbitrary and unpredictable, especially in the world where it's a new act that comes to excluding ground, and it's still outside your jurisdiction because it's not topical. The vagueness debate. He says it's stupid and they fiat enforcement, but that's not true. They can't fiat enforcement because they're not the ADA, they are the American with Disabilities Act. They say it would still be enforced with the acronym, but this is a pretty stupid argument because the acronym is not in their plan text, even if it's in the 1AC elsewhere. That is just a speech act and not their advocacy. They say the permutation solved, but we're not going for the counterplan, and it's a pretty silly argument. What if we hadn't read a counterplan? That they would still be outside of your jurisdiction and you can't vote for them. They say competing interpretation is bad, and because it's arbitrary and there's no precedent, but this is the least arbitrary way to evaluate it. It prevents a judge intervention because the judge could determine the one way of interpreting debate is fairer for the negative, or one way of debate is more fair for the affirmative. Ours is a better way to evaluate the debate because we'll win that our interpretation is more fair, which means you should always go for the fairest interpretation. What?
It forces us to read disads.
It forces us to read disads. There potential abuse. All you know, abuse is always going to be potential abuse because it forces us to read disads. The Americans with Disability
Act just so we can prove the in-round abuse. And it doesn't matter if there's no precedent, there's still abuse in this round, and it's a at least arbitrary way to evaluate this debate. They say normal means when we know we've solved, but there's no normal means for the American with Disability Act. It says there's no abuse because they're defending the dissent. That's all above. Well, you see, preparation and strategy is key. The new act in the finals of the TOC means they should have written their plan text correctly. They say, don't punish us. I'm sorry. That's too bad. You screwed it up. And they say the politicians aren't stupid. They would still do it, but the Supreme Court would still strike it down. Additionally, jurisdiction proves you outside of your jurisdiction to vote for them, and it's irrelevant because there's a difference between what the Congress would find out and what the plan text does. If the plan text just doesn't make any sense, you can't vote for it. They say it doesn't matter because they'll still defend it, but this is irrelevant in the world where you have to evaluate it based on the plan text. He has no argument against this in the choice. He said the solvency evidence assumes that this is irrelevant. You have to attack you have to base it on the plan text. This could have been a tricky Greenhill trick to win the TOC. We couldn't know because we're silly juniors. Additionally, they say we still solve. That's all above. The Supreme Court would strike their clap down, vote negative on presumption.
530.
Photo will be
119.
This vagueness argument. Then it'll be. Well, did you flow the debate about competing interpretations on the other T flow?
When you start off, you say T, do you mean the original increase argument, or do you mean the...
Yeah, T vagueness.
Or do you mean vagueness?
Yeah, vagueness. And I just kind of floated it all together.
Wait, do you mean the T increase?
Vagueness.
Okay, so you should just go into vagueness first.
Yeah.
Vagueness.
Alright.
And then
Give me a second, find my...
the debate about competing interpretations thing. I flowed that on the other T.
Yeah, that was on increase.
Okay.
Vagueness.
Solvency. Then the critique overview. Then the critique. And the
We're not making solvency evidence against the ADA, the actual acronym, which indicates we still feel the enforcement of the ADA. He talks about how we screw evidence not true. We'll argue the fact that a debate about competing interpretation is bad leads to arbitrary exclusions, which the government would never be able to predict. Additionally, the judge intervention because the judge has to evaluate which a competing interpretation would be better. That's arbitrary. Additionally, he concedes the argument that without a precedent for the round in Top County, he concedes the argument that Top County is a debate about keeping fairness, and that means that indicates that if we have fairness in the round, that Top County violation will go away. There's no in-round. He said it actually proves that he talks about the Supreme Court will strike down to that. That's not true. The VO would ensure enforcement. That means that the Supreme Court would not be able to strike that. They have no ground whatsoever. They have double ground whatsoever because they have American Disability Act and they have Americans Disability Act, which indicates they have double ground. Additionally, they still have ground on the advantage that's inevitable. Anyways, additionally, the plan test is not critical because the plan test is uniquely bad because it has the negative ground, and here to the plan test is uniquely bad because it has their negative ground. That means that the negatives will always claim advantages and claim dissent of the advantage. Anyways, additionally, jurisdiction not competing voting issue whatsoever. We have a counter interpretation, and we'll argue the fact that debate about competing interpretation is bad. Additionally, it's the argument that politicians are not idiots. It's also not idiots. There's a risk that they'll identify the fact that the ADA stands for Americans Disability Act, which indicates it's also their office now, and on the
don't vote on presumption because there's the risk that we solve.
And don't vote on presumption. There's a risk that we saw that back. Additionally, on the next topic about I answered all the arbitrary arguments about it. He talks about how you have to force them to read the JSF, but that's not true. Even without the argument of debate about competing interpretation, that they still have the ability to run JSF. There's no in-round to be said with because they still run JSF to write down. So the argument that we lead to the ADA and discrimination and genetic euthanasia against the disabled, which means we saw the end back to the critique. Additionally, the training of people is going to be irrelevant. That there's not a link to the critique, but we'll prove that on the critique debate now. So the critique debate, the ADA will end the cause the end impact of all the repression. Here's more evidence. Diller in 2000, the ADA and the civil rights model is to achieve in place of disability for discrimination in the workplace. It's designated the larger issue about workers must provide people with disability with the fullest range of employment opportunities possible. And now the critique argument extend the PL good debate. He talks about theories, a way to attack it. That doesn't assume the political theory that is the context of our PL good debate. Just competitive equity will always discourse anyway, because in order to have that discourse, you have to outline that the parameters for that debate. There's expected situation counter intervention. The affirmative chooses to debate PL has several benefits. First, it solves back all their office. You can still claim non-PL based advantage, and additionally, it's key to combat equity. They moved out the entirety to 1C, which makes it impossible for the advantage to win. Additionally, they have the burden of majority. The negative has to negate the 1C, and the affirmative can also create a negative ground. It allows for political process. Just as a compliment. Also, it decreases the trust and intervention, limits out extreme many scenarios that don't deal with the resolution. Also, it's key to critical thinking and education concerning the states. Additionally, a lack of plan focus is valid. You should learn about the government. This is worthy. And 1998, the cultural logic of the national state would be to be the only agent capable of making a real difference in the amount of self-efficient status and influence about the Americans. The left arm alliance will never have to effect on the law of the United States to form it. And will require the cultural left to forget about the budget of conflict of Americans. This is the public charge of real country, nothing but more direct towards American left and conquer political platforms. It's a list of specific run the existence of such a list and opinion and debated and revised after policies. If we win the framework debate, then we win the case will always outweigh for a couple of reasons. Because the answer point is we have a systemic impact to racism. We need to resolve the anti-impact to the case addition. We have a magnitude nuclear extinction, which fundamentally outweighs and additionally proves that all the critique links will be non-unique. Because mental disorder, that distinction between the mentally ill and the disabled movement already in the identity politics already exists. With non-unique other critique links. Additionally, it's not. It also proves why it's not a critique of their methodology will always be flawed. Even if it's a critique of methodology, it means that framework it will prove that the critique of methodology is uniquely flawed. The framework is won by if we prove by field is good. Also, it's not causing evidence to indicate that the disabled movement is excluded. It's good right now that indicates that identity politics is uniquely good. That doesn't lead to a universal project. Disabled people are allowed to stick together, and that indicates and also that's not unique anyways because mobile optimization is already occurring right now. The disabled movement is already fractured and suckle. We only increase their coalitional politics. Additionally, there's permutation. You can do the plan and the alternate. We resist identity politics. Everyone will be coming to one group. Additionally, he raises pity to seven. That's not true. The permutation was all that link because we give mental health care to big groups, which is a pity link. Which and the only reason why they had a pity link is because they don't identify them as one big group, but that's not true. Because in the one with the permutation that indicates we allow the disabled people we end the discrimination of disabled people, which means we put them into one big group that solves the link to all their offense. Additionally, solves the therapy link. We don't defend therapy and with no evidence indicates that confidentiality. With he talks about how they turn the case of capitalism, but that's not true. They don't turn the case of capitalism. It's already in church right now. It's non-union fragmentation of that capitalist system is already occurring. We only mobilize that the coalition politics to resist that capitalism by allowing employees to stop that discrimination. Usually that's what they give, but that the plan is not going to get to politics. We have the demands of state action and our evidence to get. We expect the evidence from the 1 which indicates that the way to use the master's house to break down to action we have to use the master's house to break down that master's house. And additionally, on the alternative basis, the argument that indicates that utopian base that the alternative is utopia that's voting issue by Edwin. There's no legislative system. We can never generate any office. Yet the alternative, which is uniquely based on the voting that destroys all everyone about it. Additionally, the kind of destroys that office on what pays are good and what vagueness would be good in other offices. I already said voting issue about equity. And our counter interpretation is that you can have a planning kind of plan or you can have an alternative that's not utopian and pay
346.
What they're meaning to say, which destroys my ability to argue against them, and their only warrant to a voting issue is competitive equity, which means this is the worst form of destroying competitive equity. 2 in our overview. Look, it's pretty simple. We have offense and they have none. You should not be able to get away with writing a plan text that does not mean anything. This makes them not topical because in order to be topical, you have to increase mental health care. The American with Disabilities Act does not exist, which means that passing something or expanding it would not increase mental health care. This means that all of their arguments about competing interpretations fundamentally don't matter because that does not function as a counter-interpretation. They have to have an interpretation of debate that says something like, you could look at our evidence to prove we're topical. This is not an argument made in the debate, which means that this is functionally a conceded T violation with only defensive or offensive arguments about competing interpretations. You should pull the trigger here pretty simply. Now, the competing interpretation debate. She says competing interpretations back to judge intervention. This is the opposite way around. If we can win that there are scenarios in which the negative would not be able to have ground under their interpretation of debate where you are allowed to misspell words that mean nothing, and we have contextual evidence that says what the Americans with Disability Act actually is and how the Supreme Court would strike down it if it was not, if it was misspelled incorrectly. Additionally, she concedes one argument that competing interpretations is key to minimize judge intervention because otherwise you would have to look to their solvency evidence to see what acronyms it uses for the ADA, and it's easier to determine whether or this is fair than whether
one policy is fair than.
Alright, it's easier to determine whether one policy is fair than another, i.e. whether the plan text is fair or not, or then whether the entire 1AC is fair. And the affirmative conceded our argument that the plan text is most important to determine the debate in the 1AR, which means the game is over there. Additionally, the 2AC conceded our jurisdiction voter, which means that we don't have to win competing interpretations to win. All the 1A arguments about that are new. Now the line by line, she says that the solvency evidence for the ADA, but she concedes the argument that the ADA is not the plan text to me. They can't refer to that. This makes them intrinsic and destroys our ground. This is a function of the in-round abuse privilege. Says competing interpretation of that. The only warrant is says judge intervention, and she makes this argument about how it doesn't set a precedent. This doesn't matter. This is the least arbitrary way to evaluate because you can weigh offense and defense for certain interpretations. Their interpretation would allow people to do things like pass some plan to do the national missile defense, except they would misspell defense and change it to offense. This would make it the NMO, which is functionally different for all of our ground. The American with Disability Act would only affect one American, which means that we don't have grounds for any of our large politics. What the fuck is that?
Go.
Any of our large politics. The next argument, she says that fiat ensures enforcement, but the fiat, the American with Disabilities Act, this does not ensure enforcement of an increase in mental health care, which means they're jurisdictionally not top, which says it doubles our ground. This is the worst argument I've ever heard. And it doesn't make sense because it only reduces our ground when we have less links about the Americans with Disability Act. Hell, they read less letters in the plan, which said the plan text does not keep this contradictory crossed by the O, which says that the negative will still have offense against our advantages, but this is irrelevant when the affirmative is allowed to spike out of our offense against their advantages by saying no link. And if we have one person with a disability, that's enough. This is functionally, she says jurisdiction is not a voting issue because their counter-interpretation, but this is incorrect. Jurisdiction is the least arbitrary way to evaluate topicality. You are given a resolution, the affirmative, to affirm that resolution by increasing mental health care. If they did only increase the American with Disability Act, there is no increase of mental health care because that does not exist in the status quo. They don't have any counter-interpretation of increase. Additionally, she says that it's not, you don't vote negative on presumption, but yes, you do. Their fiat does not extend to the Americans with Disability Act, which means that the Supreme Court would be able to strike down their plan. Basically, no sympathy for Saad's pretty speech because he fucked this up and he should have known better.
Wherever you pause is overview, then it will be the competing interpretation today, and then I guess the critique, and then we'll wind down.
I noticed that a lot of you laughed during its entire 2AR because this argument is a big joke. Look, our plan text indicates that Congress should amend the American with Disabilities Act to guarantee confidentiality for mental health care. My 2AC position has been that there is zero abuse in this round, and 5 reasonably intelligent people can figure that out. We advocate that you should have confidentiality for mental health care. We agreed in the 2AC that was topical, which means that we are topical. They read specific case terms. We didn't spike out of them. In the 2AC, we didn't spike out of their politics links in the 2AC, which means that there is zero in-round abuse and that there was zero potential abuse. Now, we'll win the competing interpretation today on a few technicalities that he dropped. Go to his review, and he indicates that the negative won't have any ground. These are his major points of offense, that the negative won't have any ground, but that is not justified what happened in this round because they read all their dissent case arguments, and they still applied also. They could have garnered offense off of the intention of the plan, which is to guarantee confidentiality for mental health care. That's what the 2AC argued, and the 1AR extended across by indicating that we enforce that confidentiality given mental health care. He said that it's a misspell, but we only the amending the American with Disability Act is only the enforcement of the plan, which means that the actual intent of the plan is topical. He said the competing interpretation debate leads to advantage. Go there now. Look, he conceded in 1AR critical argument that competing interpretation that topicality is a debate about generating fairness. That there's fairness in this round, and we shouldn't evaluate the debate about a competing interpretation's topicality is made so that debate can be fair. That each side has enough ground and enough predictability to win debates. We did not spike out of any of their arguments on the dissent or any of their soft arguments, which mean that you should evaluate the dissent on not an offense-defense paradigm, but rather on a paradigm that justifies whether you should vote for this silly argument or not. Our plan text might have been worded misspelled a little differently, but there was zero abuse coming off of this, and if we rated it in a different round, we would still have defended that that we would have confidentiality for mental health care. There is zero abuse now. Go to the line-by-line property says that we judge intervention. That's not true. There's zero warrant for that. Anyway, the 1AR makes the argument why judge intervention is inevitable. That means that the only standard that's evaluable is the argument that you should competing interpret that topicality is made for fairness. Competing interpretations would lead to arbitrary exclusions of the affirmative, i.e. just find a random definition to exclude the affirmative, which uniquely destroys fairness. The 1AR made that argument, the 2AR conceded it, which means that the competing interpretation debate actually uniquely destroys fairness, and the only way to solve for that is to have topicality debates based on in-round abuse. That's the only way to evaluate the round. 5 reasonably intelligent people can figure that out. Now, the reason you clap for him is because his junior career is done. Maybe next fall class, maybe next fall, maybe next, better luck next time. So, now the critique.
And Maggie makes the argument simply that plan focus is good. We were arguing that criticism should not be evaluated because they're extraneous narratives, not that you have to look at the plain text. Fine, even if you look at the plain text, go ahead, look at it. It says Congress should amend the American with Disabilities Act to guarantee confidentiality of American mental health care. Go down to the line by line. He's arguing about topicality. Group that argument. Our argument is that the intention of the plan is so topical, and we would defend that we would prevent confidentiality for mental health care, even if in the competing interpretations around it. And also, he takes across the jurisdiction voter. He concedes in one error's analysis that we are within the jurisdiction because the intention of the plan is to have is for topical action. Even if the one error doesn't make this argument, it can be if it's true. That's Amy Ryan's philosophy, and it's absolutely true. Look at the plain text. We would defend topical action, and even if the enforcement is not topical, the intention of the plain text would still be topical. Also, he makes the argument that you vote on presumption because the plain text would never pass and the Supreme Court would vote it down. But the one error makes an analysis that the Supreme that we fee out enforcement and now that we fee out enforcement of the plan, and that the Congress should amend the American with Disabilities Act. That means that nothing would have the Supreme Court would be able to interpret the actual intention of the plan. It doesn't matter because if you get up and read this in Congress, people are going to understand that you're trying to guarantee confidentiality of mental health care. They could read a backlash argument why people in Congress don't like confidentiality of mental health care. It would all link because it's our perception. We defend the interpretation of the plan. He says, I'm not going for the double ground argument. You're right, that was stupid. He says that would lead that we'd spike out all of their stats because it justifies misspelling offense into defense or an empty argument. But that's stupid because then you would actually have plain text. You would actually have plain text justification for that argument. You could run your arguments backwards, and that actually wouldn't be topical. The plain text is not uniquely that instance, which means that the we need argument about the we need argument becomes our counter-interpretation because we have offensive reasons why you should include us in the resolution. We're not abusive for them, and it's unfair to arbitrarily exclude us just because our coach might have missed out a freaking letter in the plain text. That's not a good reason to end someone's career, and 5 reasonably intelligent people should understand that now. He says that it's not of your church change. You can't vote for that. I answered that above. He says we don't have a counter-interpretation. The we need functionally becomes a counter-interpretation. Again, the 1 hour answered back all their offense about why it should be debated by competing interpretations. He said that we and extend across the argument why this round doesn't set a precedent. The only reason why you would vote on competing interpretations is so that this doesn't happen again. But this round doesn't set a precedent. If I wanted to run this plain text again, I would run it again. There would still be ground because we would defend that confidentiality should be given for mental health care, which means that they still have ground. The fundamental argument is that this argument is silly, and we didn't spike out of any other dissents or any other soft arguments, which means that even if this plain text is wrong, we still defended what it means, and the intent is still topical. Don't vote on jurisdiction because it uniquely destroys fairness.
So you can hear the comments.
And Dr. B, are we invited?
No, you're too young. I keep trying to tell you you're too young.
I'll start and I'll try to be pretty brief. It's actually fairly ironic because I spend most of the day at work researching an issue that'll decide whether the Republican gubernatorial candidate gets to participate in the primary, and that turns on an issue of whether a comma is in a statute or not. One observation, I'd probably self-identify as a judge who is on good days a tad bit interventionist and on other days grossly interventionist. I'm unwilling to be complicit in the activity's final plunge into reductionism, and the punchline of all that is that the AF had me at stupid. For all this talk about competing alternatives, it's not clear to me what either team's interpretation really is. Here's my best guess. The negative, the AF plan text as written must textually increase mental health care, whatever. AF, I'm a little unclear on this, but I think it's something like functionally what we meant to say and what everybody understood us as saying must advocate an increase in mental health care. Maybe that wasn't explicit enough. If it's not the argument, then I'm just wrong. But in choosing between these competing interpretations and weighing this offense and defense, I have to make value judgments. I think the AF's in-round fairness arguments are persuasive to me. I guess the solvency question is a lot closer, but this isn't going to be my first I vote neg on presumption ballot. I don't think the 2NR does the work on that in the end game.
I started by evaluating the debate about competing interpretations. I think that defined the way I evaluated all of the issues in this debate. I think that the negative does not do a very good job of warranted explanation of why you should evaluate the debate based on competing interpretations. And given that I think that the affirmative is right on, that topicality is a question of fairness, and if they demonstrate that there's no in-round abuse in this debate, then you will not win this debate, because all of your arguments about abuse are definitely arguments about potential abuse. You make some argument about the NMD, which I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. And then you make another argument that they could potentially say that they only affect one American with a disability, which I also think is stupid. And they clearly do not do within this debate. I think that this matters even if they don't have a counterinterpretation, and I think that's why this argument is particularly important, because the whole point of the affirmative emphasis on this argument is that they can win this debate simply on defense, and I think that they do that effectively. Next, plan text key. I think that this is mostly irrelevant to the debate because the affirmative doesn't attempt to change the plan. They clearly admit throughout the debate that they said American. However, this doesn't affect. So your conditionality argument does not, link, and it does not affect their argument that the intent in the 2AC and onwards in the 1AC everywhere within the debate is to defend the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you still have disadvantaged ground, which is the ultimate standard. T standards was the next place that I looked, and I am unclear after the 2NR what words exactly they violate in the resolution. I'm unclear about almost the entirety of this topicality argument. I don't understand why they're not topical because they forgot to add an S to Americans with disabilities, and I think this is a case of, all of your standards here are potential abuse standards, which, I think that you don't win an offense-defense framework. The last thing I look to is solvency, and I think that you win substantial risk that the plan does not solve because it could be struck down. Your Allen card, though, does say that it says almost always be struck down. They also make an argument that Congress would understand if it said American with disabilities, which may not be a very good argument, but it's made in the 1AR and 2AR, it's not answered. So I think even if there's a small likelihood of solvency, it isn't 100% solvency.
When judges have to judge, they have to deal with uncharted waters. I kind of want to make 3 comments that are totally unrelated to my decision, and then I'll explain my decision. One totally unrelated kind of observation is that I did vote negative in this debate, but I hope that it doesn't become a referendum for everyone to look for spelling errors all over the place and create a witch hunt to that end. I think that arguments, like this have popped up in college and high school alike, and I hope that this doesn't become the emphasis of high school institutes. And I thought about that, and I think there's some room for affirmative to generate some offense in this department, and I hope the audience hears that. I also think the judges need to decide how much of the timeout time they'll give both teams. And I'm not sure that that was handled perfectly by this panel, but I think we did the best we could in this context. But I wonder if a new norm should emerge as to how much dead time can occur in the debate. I think there was, secondly, a moment when the 2NR ended where the audience, I thought, was a shade out of line, and I wanted to speak to the audience. I think that if the audience was celebrating a great 2NR, and in some ways it was a great 2NR, that would be one thing, but I think it was celebrating ad homs, and I think it also ignored the fact that the 2AR had to prep, and I just thought that it was maybe not as classy as the audience would want it to be if they were on that stage. The last comment I want to make, and I say this because I've been on the other side of it, is that I think the most frustrating thing in the world is when the ballots get announced one by one and are kind of hesitated in that manner, and while it certainly generated an excitement, I also think that I just think that if you're ever in a situation where you get to run a tournament, you should maybe consider everyone who has to go through that process. I voted negative on 3 arguments. The first was that I thought the plan would be struck down by the court. I think that this means 2 things: that the affirmative doesn't solve it all, and that also, therefore, they don't increase. I'll explain those arguments in a second. I also voted on theory, which is just the question of whether or not the plan is written or its attempt to kind of be crafted into something that it's textually not is fair. The strike down argument, I think this is an instance where specifying your agent in a weird way hurt you, because you won the argument that the Congress might figure this out. I don't even think the negative attempted to fight that, but I think that you pretty clearly, absent the fiat argument, granted all their contentions that the court would subsequently strike this down. I thought I was going to pick up the plan and read a different plan that said that, we ensure enforcement, but that's not how the plan is written. The plan is written to have the Congress make a certain change. It doesn't really speak to how, you don't fiat court deference, essentially. I think there was a moment by either affirmative or rebuttalist where you said, we are topical during the intervening time. between when the Congress acts and the court strikes this down, that you probably went on a 5-0. I don't want to speak for my other colleagues. And I was looking and kind of hoping that argument was there, but I felt it wasn't. And I think that in the fiat argument that you make, they're kind of right to call BS on this, because you do guarantee, the word guarantee appears in the plan, but it's only to what the Congress does and the change that they make to the ADA. It's not how other entities will interpret that change, which means that if they win their argument, which they do by the voice of concession, that the court would strike that down, the word guarantee does not extend to the way the court would defer. I also voted on the fairness argument, and I'll try to get the Cliff Notes version of this. Essentially, the affirmative thesis is to kind of morph or turn, and I don't mean that in a negative way, the competing interpretations argument into a contention that only unique abuse matters. And at some level that resonates with me, but here I thought was the problem in this debate with that. First, in the 1AR, you extended another impact to competing interpretations being bad, and that was that it minimized judge intervention. And a tremendous thesis of the 2NR was to turn that contention back and to say that all the discussion about the plan text meant that, and every move that you do make in this debate where you attempt to kind of forgive the error written in the plan is a move towards judge bias and moving towards judge intervention. And let's face it, I mean, your referendum, which resonates with me, that this is sort of a silly argument, is an attempt to appeal to my bias that this argument is silly. I think that in the end, you also sort of mishandled and jives with this. The moment where they attempted to spin what you said on the critique in the 1AR as plan text key, they made a variety of reasons why the plan text should come first, and you kind of said, oh, we didn't really say that the plan text should come first. And I don't really think that you denied in that moment their reasons that they provided, that the way in which we should assess these theory questions is to place a lot of privilege on the way the plan text is written and a lot of privilege on minimizing judge intervention. And I thought about it, and here's the bottom line. Is fairness determined solely through in-round abuse between the participants? And I think it's more than that. I think that it's whether or not the judges are fair and whether or not they intervene. I think that college prep would say that this decision is unfair if I knee-jerked and said, I think this argument is irrelevant. I think a component of fairness is unique abuse, but I also think a component of it is potential abuse. And in the end, I just kind of think that there are other standards which exist as to why we have a topic, and the only standard that exists isn't to make the debate fair. So, well, it is to make it fair, but it's not only to make it, I guess, reasonable in the eyes of the app. It's also to make it strict in the eyes of the judge and fair for all parties involved. So, in the end, I voted nay. If you have questions, feel free to answer.
I think I would agree more or less exactly with pretty much everything that Will said on this point. I didn't really get to a lot of the things he talked about in my decision. I think that the first question has to be resolved, much like Raja, is the question of whether or not it can be a debate about competing interpretations versus in-round abuse. And I also agree with everything that Raja says after that discussion, because I think that it's clearly an affirmative win if the debate is not about competing interpretations, because there's very clearly no or an extremely small amount of in-round abuse. And that certainly is something that doesn't really pass the bar what I would really want to vote for. But I don't, and that's kind of frustrating for me because I think it should be clear to you all from the very beginning of this debate that the only argument you are really going to have to win is competing interpretations is important, potential abuse matters. And it's difficult because you really almost don't talk about it in the 2NR, and there's very little discussion of it in the 1NR either. The 1NR keeps saying, well, when competing interpretations is good, well, when competing interpretations is good, and then you just kind of get through it. It's like, well, we don't have to read the relevant arguments to prove abuse. And that's, true. And that argument isn't even extended to the 2NR. It's kind of frustrating when I'm like, the whole debate is very clearly going to revolve around this single question. And there's maybe 15 or 20 seconds of discussion of it in the last two rebuttals. And that's just kind of unfortunate. And that's not to detract from the rest of the speeches. I thought there were excellent speeches on the other portions. But, it's just hard to debate for 3 days and at 13 rounds or whatever. And it's just hard to do. But that's just kind of a, step back a little bit and just think, what am I really going to have to win in this case? But I think that the negative pretty clearly wins. The competing interpretations is better, if not a perfect interpretation of the debate for the reasons that Will talked about, and especially the question of whether or not judge intervention is a relevant discussion, because and I think the 1AR discussion of judge intervention is the relevant standard for determining how we should evaluate top caliber debates, and the 2NR basically link term of that argument is. It is enough for me to think that that's a reasonable way to evaluate the debate, even absent any of the other discussions that happen. I think your only argument in response to this is an argument that I never fully understand, which is just that it's unfair to the affirmative evaluating a framework of competing interpretations because it basically excludes the affirmative. And I didn't really ever understand this argument. As far as I can tell, it's just an argument that it excludes affirmatives that pretty much everyone knows are actually topical. And that just kind of begs the question of whether or not it's relevant and whether or not we want to be able to do that. And I mean, it's difficult because in making that argument and in my own biases about how I think about debate, I tend to be an offense versus defense sort of person. And it's hard to say that I'm voting on judge intervention bad by deferring to my particular bias on this issue, which is that it's offense versus defense. But it's difficult for me to resolve that question. I think the way that the 1AR versus 2NR concession goes down is the easiest way for me to resolve that. Absent all of that, I think that, given all of that, I think that the negative is clearly winning, that your interpretation of debate, and it's unclear for me what even the interpretation necessarily is. As far as I can tell, our we meet argument is the counter-interpretation, which means basically that the affirmative can re-clarify and explain what the intent of their plan is. And I think that definitely, is not probably the worst interpretation in the world, but it certainly is not as good as got to be textually the res. So I think that it's pretty clean once I resolve that question that the negative wins this debate. I only have one other comment, and I don't know. It's just on the counterplan debate, there are several places in the negative block where they make arguments like potential use not a VI, set the bar high for what constitutes a voting issue. There's not enough clear abuse to be a reason to vote against us on dispositionality.
Textual comp is a bad standard for evaluating. That's in the negative block.
Yeah. I think if you concede any of those arguments, it's 20 seconds on this thing in the 1AR, and you can probably go. And that's hard. I mean, that's just real hard because it's like, I think that you all were in solid shape, absent if that clarification happens. That's just another one of those. It's hard. It's hard to step back from the debate when it's in the finals. You don't got much prep time. I feel kind of bad about that, but I thought this was a really excellent debate, so I don't take anything away from it.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Why is a plan as written not topical? It might not. We might not be able to solve, for example, but if we amend, the American with Disabilities Act, why wouldn't that be topical in a world where they're not running substantially increased?
Well, he says in the 2NR that we've all conceded that, we had a discussion about the whole increase question.
Sure. And
increase means there has to be more, and the plan amends something that doesn't exist, so there functionally is no plan. And no plan equals no. There isn't anything that gets increased, and the 2NR says that, and I've never understood an affirmative argument that was in response to that.
For me, it's not only that it doesn't exist, but it's also if they win the strike down argument, that their contention is that nothing, there's never actually an increase in public health services.
I also meant to say something about the audience clapping after the 2NR. I thought that was disruptive and shouldn't have been done. It's already been talked about. I'm not going to talk about it much more. In the end, I think that this debate, in a certain sense for me, revolves around whether I can vote affirmative if the affirmative has only defense in the face of negative offense. I agree with Raja that that the Supreme Court overturn evidence is not very good and that the act is a risk of happening, which means I don't think that these presumption arguments are compelling. There are two reasons to vote negative anyway. The first one is topicality. The plan doesn't increase mental health care, essentially because the plan as written doesn't take effect. It amends something that doesn't exist and has no action. And your answer is that it intends to do this, and this intuitively makes sense. I don't think it answers their arguments about potential abuse, and the affirmative can potentially alter the solvency claim to contradict the initial statement of the plan and so on. The second reason I think is their offensive arguments about competition or about competing interpretations, which I think they do a decent job on. The concession of the least arbitrary measure of evaluating a plan text, I think, is important for them. It means that the act is tied to the words of the plan, and so is the judge, and it prevents intervention, is critical to the ground, and so on. I think that helps me decide that competing interpretations is important in this instance. And while I can generally understand and sympathize with the affirmative position, I think that to write a plan that, were it read literally, has taken effect is the most basic affirmative obligation, more or less.
Can I ask one question to all three? is there anything we said in the debate that was unclear as to why we meant the Americans with Disabilities Act? I mean, clearly they did ask that in cross-ex. We don't make any arguments as to why, no, there's no link. We only, in fact, one American who has a disability. That being said, given the gravity of the round, and I appreciate your comments about the precedent that's set, or not said, or whatever, but the reason the audience clapped, it seemed to me, was they were winning because, I'm not saying it's a cheap shot, because they're great debaters, 3 people who are quality judges voted for them, but my question is, what is unclear about what we meant that hurt their ground to the extent that, you know, that potential abuse was ever a problem?
I don't think that your team did make an argument that made it unclear which act they were talking about, and that's why this debate I thought was so frustrating. I think that if they win their argument about the competing interpretation of debate...
My question is why does it even have to go that far? Why does it even have to go that far in a world where you know what we're talking about? For example, if we put on a site, I don't know, 51, 303. Well, clearly that's a typo. You meant 5303. That would be, enough to discredit evidence or something along the lines. My point is, if an S, the final round of the TOC is decided because S was left out of the plan, and do you think they demonstrated demonstrable abuse in the debate about stuff we tried to get out of, stuff, potential abuse that could have occurred? I understand the NMG office,
As you pose this question, you asked 2 things that I kind of categorized differently in my mind.
Sure.
Was there a moment where the app stood up and said, no link, lack of plurals gets us out of it? Obviously not. Okay. Does that respond to a component of their argument, which is, could teams potentially manipulate different plan flaws to their benefit? They could, I guess, you know what I mean? And that gave them something. But the discussion for me, and I think really for all of us, is also more nuanced than that. It comes down to the question of, for me, how the court would react to it, for all of us, whether or not that act actually exists. All you're really asking is what was a huge theme of the 2AR, which is, in-round abuse matters and intent matters, right? And I think, in the end, the Cliff Note version of the entire decision is that, I think a lot comes down to what camp you fall into. And I think that 2 of the judges on the panel are, without disparaging them at all, in the camp of, this is just stupid. And I think some of the other judges in the panel are kind of in the camp of, we know this is stupid, but we're going to give it a good listen. And as the good listen transpired, I thought that they just did out-debate you on some of the questions of whether or not this is fair. And I agree with Callum that it is not a totally insignificant error in writing the plan. Not an unfair thing for a judge to say to a team is a very basic obligation is to have the plan correctly. Am I with you that this sucks? Yeah, I hope that that's very visible from my nonverbal reactions right now. I think this sucks, and I'm quite frankly concerned about how it will be deployed. But I'm here to judge a debate, and I judged it.
I think all of us would, I think I can speak for everyone when I'd say that we wish this round didn't come down to an error in spelling in the plain text. But I think that your example about giving a site that's misprinted, no, I don't think that that's a reason why a team should ever lose. I think that literally the only words that are relevant for a decision like this one are the words of the plan text. The 15 seconds that the app spends in the 1AC reading the plan text should do the plan, essentially. And I think that just writing the plan in this debate is relevant. I agree. My gut reaction is that this argument is dumb. And, I wouldn't run or go for this argument if I was still debating. But I think that if the debate is about competing interpretations and they win their interpretation of how debate should work, and whether or not the app was abusive isn't that relevant if they're not topical.
I want to say one thing. I disagree with at least what Will said about my half.
I didn't mean to characterize you as totally disgusting.
As rejecting the argument because I thought it was stupid. I thought, I did think the argument was stupid, and I think where that mattered was on your ability to, after you win the debate about competing interpretations, in my opinion, then after that point, on the question of do they generate in-round abuse, the fact that their argument is so stupid hurts them in their ability to do so. So, it's not I don't, want to say that I disregard.
I apologize for making you sound like you just clearly didn't do that.
I just have a question.
not just in terms of it would have been a much, nicer debate outcome, but we're more strategically ahead on the argument I want to lower
critique in my mind. Yeah. I think that the offensive side of that was more of a link and an impact answer, and I don't think they defended identity politics. I think it would have just been a better strategic idea anyway, because I think that even the people that voted for this argument weren't incredibly happy about doing so.
I think you were pretty clearly ahead on the substance level critique. I don't think that was even close. It's hard to know how the theory arguments would have gone down because a lot of it got developed. I mean, I think your arguments are really good.
Oh, I mean, I don't know, if things are different, they'd be different. I mean, the first part of your question, as you pose it, would it be a more pleasant experience? The plan law doesn't need to be like unpleasant and ad hominem. That just kind of happens. It doesn't need to be that way. The critique, I just agree with the critique. What were you doing better on that? I kind of agree with what was said. I mean, I think I think that discussion would have been close, not just on the theory questions, but also on the question of whether or not they really did, whether or not essentially the permutation remedied the kind of starting point arguments. But I don't know. I mean, hard to say.
Yeah, I don't think that I could really answer that question. Absence development. I definitely don't think that the affirmative, was so far out of it that if you had gone for, the critique that they kind of wanted to say or whatever, I think that would have been a close debate.
Yeah, I think they were doing well in the arguments as well. Actually, I think I answered that question a little too unconditionally, I guess.
There's a 4 minutes of the when they are around this
I think everybody's up into 2 hours,
Okay.
Well, I have a question. I mean, for me, I think, I have a lot of respect for y'all, for three. I think y'all done a lot to advance, a lot of intellectual arguments and debate. And it just seems to me that, to lose, the final round in front of a big audience after a whole year, I mean, y'all know how it is to debate a whole year, do a lot of work. And it just seems to me that a lot of judges just hide behind, well, you didn't have any offense, you didn't, there's always risk. You might, you could kill Donald Duck, but, you don't have a card saying you don't kill Donald Duck. There's a risk, right? And it seems to me that sort of, from us, like, the laziness of a judge, and it's like that allows these, infinite regression of arguments to come about.
I wanted to say something about that very quickly. I think psychologically, for me at least, it is difficult to vote on this argument at all, and the final round of the 2AC doesn't make it any easier, obviously. But I think that essentially, if the AF loses this argument, they lost the argument. If the argument is bad, the affirmative's burden is to prove that argument is bad. And I think that in this debate, the negative did a good job of debating their interpretations. I don't think any of us are hiding behind the lack of abuse. To hide from this argument would be to vote affirmative and say that it was just stupid. And I know they certainly didn't do that. They just filed their decisions well.
Yeah, I guess the frustration is we can't point to anything, and maybe y'all can, as to what the potential abuse could be. For example, based on what we said in the debate, what arguments could they run?
As you pose that question, you say you can't see any potential abuse based on what you did in this debate. And what you did in this debate are instances of deep abuse. I mean, the thesis that an affirmative can vaguely manipulate their plan text for the sake of potential abuse is distinct from what you did in this debate. So I can agree with kind of part of your premise and not the totality of it. I don't know. I feel weird. I sympathize, but I don't feel like I owe an apology. I just judged, and it's a very basic question that you encounter as a judge early on in the process, which is, are you going to vote for arguments you hate? You know what I mean? And if you felt like we were lazy or hid behind that, then you kind of have a right to feel that way. I mean, your frustration is beyond understandable, okay? And I think I share a lot of it. There are times when I feel saddled by this whole philosophy of not intervening because I know it makes a difference. And I know the audience in the end is going to write a bunch of cheap shots at high school debate camps. You know what I mean? But I think that psychology didn't play in your benefit, that it was the final round of the TOC. I think it just meant that I had to really take the time to judge on what was in front of me. And in the end, I don't think anyone wanted any other way. I could be wrong.
I think that something that Will said pretty early in his decision is sort of most relevant for me, is that I think that fairness includes more than what happened in the context of the hour and a half of the debate. I think it includes the judge's responsibility to the debaters to do the best job the judge can do. And if I had watched this round two of the Whitman High School tournament, I would have voted for the negative. And I can't say that I'm going to change the way that I'm going to evaluate a debate just because.
Would you feel that way if there was a finals at the NDT?
Yeah, I mean, and I told.
Would you really?
I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from. Because
as a participant?
Yeah.
As a coach?
The last year of this
I'm going, I'm mad and frustrated and everything else. There's a lot of reasons.
Because we've got a lot of current, debaters. If this is the NDT and it's the final round and it's a 3-2, and somebody said, well, you left the S out of the plan and there were potential things that you could have done. I mean...
Sure. I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from. The last year of this tournament, I was coaching St. Mark's and we lost on Spark. And
that's different.
Well, right. And I mean, and this year at the Senior Nationals, we had a big T debate that ultimately came down in the final round of the Senior Nationals. A big T debate that came down to questions of whether or not the issue of fairness was dealt with. And I mean,
I thought you would.
And
if you're looking for us to make this, I can't make this okay. I mean, this sucks. You know what I mean? I don't know what else to say. I mean, but I do think that I think what we're all trying to say is, we're just doing our job.
Can I ask one final question? Is the plan not topical, or is the plan vague?
The plan's not topical.
On what words?
The plan amends something that doesn't exist. The plan doesn't amend anything as a result. It's not increased by law.
The only vaguest thing is whether or not it's fair for you to attempt to shift out of that.
I don't think I really responded to what you said the last time. I mean, I understand that in your position, that it certainly sucks. When I was in Tanzania, wasn't in the Greater Horn of Africa, on the second of the NDT. That was one of the worst things ever. But then again, we didn't have a card that Tanzania was in the Greater Horn of Africa, so it wasn't like I was angry at the panel or Andy Ryan about that.
I've been thinking about this the entire time, and it kind of stopped me from saying anything because it just seems that, it'd be a bit hypocritical for me to say something like that. But when that happened, we walked out, and the first thing I said to the neighbor was that I was going to be embarrassed if we went that round because we went on a factual inaccuracy. And it seems you were there, you remember, and it just, it seems to me that although you have admirable reasons for staying out of the intervention, there's also very admirable reasons to engage in the way that Will phrased it, just that there's a camp of people that say that this is stupid, it doesn't deserve to be in debate, and I think that Trevor's first explanation of why he voted is the best one, mainly that there are a bunch of impressionable, less than classy individuals here who thinks that the absence of a constant from a plan is the height of an intellectual activity, and that's something that could have been easily dismissed by three very smart people telling them pretty much to fuck off and voting for an argument that went the other way. And it seems that
you're characterizing this in extremes. A bunch of teenagers might have applauded in the audience, but I don't think that anyone thinks this is the height of intellectual reasoning. Okay, I mean,
we'll give it some of the other arguments.
All right, and I do sympathize. I have written many a judge philosophy where I think that the contention that the rules change because the event is big are stupid. The notion that I should judge the final round of the NDT differently, that T should be a voting issue because it's the NDT and there's a normative rule, I mean, that's all silly. And you judge how you judge, and you owe it to the debaters to judge this round the same way you judged them the last time you saw them. Because that's why they kept you on the strike sheet. If I decided situationally, Andy, to reverse the way that I judge, okay, and, it went down the other way, okay, and maybe it couldn't go down the other way because you never go for an argument like this. The greatest source of anger is that the judge decided to situationally deploy a change in their judge philosophy for the sake of this round. And Trevor frequently says things like, you had me at stupid. And you know what? No one in this room who's been judged by Trevor thinks that that's out of character for him, and hence it is fair, all right? But it would be unfair for me to say, I voted on the stupidest stuff. And by the way, I have, I pretty much have a monopoly on the history of voting on the stupidest stuff in the whole world, okay? For me to waive that and dismiss that out of hand in this moment is the worst thing I could do. And I get that I feel saddled with this responsibility and there's a different camp that I could be in. But my answer to you is, before this debate started, I wasn't. And I wasn't going to just become part of that camp because I really wanted to.
I really don't think that debates are about having the most true argument and proving the truth. I think they're about convincing people to vote for you, and individual people do that in different ways. And I think that this argument is dumb, but I think that for me to remain predictable and judge the way that I always would is more important than me to just think that. I think a lot of arguments are dumb, and people don't realize that.
It seems that if you believe that, it's not like I wasn't saying that you should switch in between round and round because that would create unpredictability for why people would put you on your strike card, and the same would be true for you, but simply that there seem to be strong normative reasons outside of just flipping back and staying particularly in this debate to join the camp that Trevor and Raj are in.
Right.
So it seems
I think you're right, but I don't think those arguments are necessarily
right. No, I'm not talking about.
He's saying change the way I judge the next debate and tell everyone about it.
I'm saying change the way you judge every debate because it would bring about pretty substantial benefits, such as discouraging arguments like these. Not to mention, your time, like honestly, when asked what I was on fire judging this debate, when I commented that I thought that we would probably lose, someone asked me what I would do. I said I would have gotten up and left because it's not worth my time, because my time is worth much more than this, and I think all of your time is worth much, much more than this.
Okay, well, you're not asking or posing an idea to me that's dawned on me for the first time. When I was 18 years old, I thought about whether or not I wanted to be an interventionist judge.
Reinventing the wheel. I didn't think this was an original argument. But I guess I just don't understand
I don't think
why
you're talking about this argument anymore. You're talking about how judges should judge generally. And I guess my answer to you is, I don't think this is about me. It's about them. I'm here to judge them and their arguments.
I mean, Andy, the two judges that were immediate ones on my strike to my entire debate career were Will and D. Height, because I knew that they were just going to decide what occurred in the debate, and because they were going to evaluate a debate like this, and that's the kind of debate that I want to have. And I don't want debate to be an activity where judges say things like, I think this argument is bad, or I think this argument is so terrible that it doesn't meet the threshold if that doesn't occur in the debate. And if people want to judge that way, I think people should judge that way, but that's not my vision of what I would like debate to be. And I feel like I have a responsibility to the debaters who I'm going to be judging now to do the best that I can do to uphold the kind of debate that I would like to see. And if people don't want to have a judge like that, everyone should totally feel free to strike me. But that's just how I see debate, and I wouldn't want it to be the other way. The thing that I love the most about debate is that it's really about what goes on in here, and it isn't about the truth. It's not about the capital T. It has nothing to do with the capital T. It's just about what people can do with the arguments that they have available to them. And I understand that creates a lot of crappy situations, but I think that's what makes this activity so cool.
What if they've gone for the permutation?
I think they should have gone for the permutation. If they get 2, you get 2. I don't understand why you do it. They can pick.
The S. That's my permutation. Yeah, that's my permutation.
I mean, that definitely remedies all the strike down arguments. I don't know if it remedies some of the.
It's always usually a theoretical reason why they advocate the permutation. And had they done that?
I think the 1AR could say if they get to kick the counter plan, or if they get status quo counter plan, we get
plus critique.
One other thing about this, it seems like sort of the focus of everything, on y'all's side is the educational damage that occurs from voting on an argument like this. It seems like then in the debate, a heavy emphasis of the debate should then be that it's uneducational and that is an impact to voting for this interpretation. And that's an offensive impact. That even if you evaluate this debate on offense and defense, there are arguments about why it's uneducational, and maybe you could have picked up judges in the comparison.
Thank you.